Thank you everyone for coming in to attend. This is part of our series of live Zoom chats or fireside chats or webinars, whatever you want to call them, where we explore, or go deep dive into some of the topical areas, working with CISOs or aspiring CISOs or cyber leaders at the Cyber Leadership Institute. This was actually by popular demand. People would like to go deeper into specific areas which they are actively involved within their organizations, or some of the areas where their board members or C executives asking pressing questions. So we decided to feature two of our experts who are part of our community in the Cyber Leadership Institute to explore the topic of zero trust. So before we get into the details, just some maybe some house rules. Number one is we will run this Q&A for about 30 minutes. Then I'll open it up to everyone on the Zoom call. So as the conversation progresses, it'll be great if you can post some questions in the chat. Then we'll prioritize those questions actually in the dying minutes of the conversation. So make sure you post your questions. There's no wrong or right answers. One thing you need to take care of, to take note of is we record these conversations to share with the broader community. So in as much as we prefer to hear your lived experiences in terms of what you have done in your own environments or what you have done with your clients, if there's something you really care about on the confidentiality side, it would be great if you can anonymize that information. So that's very, very important. So I'll go straight into what we are talking about today. I think as the enterprise perimeter continues to blur, organizations migrating business critical applications into public cloud, people working from home because of COVID, and people using their personal devices to connect to the enterprise network. The traditional perimeter reliance on perimeter defenses, I think it's no longer holds. So we've got this new concept of zero trust. And it's very important today for us to really explore what does this really mean in business terms, because as we collaborate with cyber leaders who go through the Cyber Leadership Institute, a lot of them are maybe 30% or 50% into their 3-year strategies. And now there's this, buzzword, zero trust. Where do you start? Do you have to start from scratch, or can you build zero trust into your roadmap, into what you've been doing over these years? So today we'll explore some of those important topics. Most importantly, ways that you can flexibly shift from the traditional castle and moat approach and build zero trust into the DNA of your cybersecurity strategy. So without further ado, I will introduce two of our distinguished guests. The first one is actually Ashwin Ram, who is one of our distinguished members of the Cyber Leadership Institute. Ashwin has got more than 15 years experience in cybersecurity, working across post-sales delivery solutions engineering. And he now works as a cybersecurity evangelist in the office of the CTO for Checkpoint. He's got a very rare combination, which we have seen at the Cyber Leadership Institute. By him winning our strategy competitions, he's able to articulate very complex cybersecurity matters in the language of the business. So really looking forward to hearing your insights today, Ashwin. Ashwin is also joined by Joe, who is another veteran in cybersecurity solutions engineering and consultancy with more than 20 years experience working across multiple industry verticals, advising senior business leaders and directors in areas of cyber resilience. Joe holds multiple industry certifications and also regularly speaks at high profile industry conferences. So welcome, gentlemen, and I'll go straight into our conversation tonight, starting off with you, Ashwin. Maybe just take us a step back and really define what does this zero trust mean. There's a lot of buzzwords in cybersecurity, which to me remains one of our biggest challenges, because we've got this tendency of using really complicated vocabulary. So zero trust is, I think out there we talk of 0-day vulnerabilities. There's a lot of complexity. So can you really distill this concept? What does it mean to you, and in your experience helping clients embark on this journey?
Sure, thank you, Phil. Folks, hopefully you're all safe and sound. So zero trust, you're right, Phil. There's actually a lot of zeros out there. Zero trust, 0-day vulnerabilities, 0-second approach. Now, folks, zero trust is, in an essence, it's a security model. It's an approach to cybersecurity, cyber resilience. And its motto is built around never trust, always verify. So it's essentially an adoption of a security posture that adopts a default deny approach, where systems and systems are hardened and isolated until there's a certain level of trust that has been established. That's the core crux of it. And there are actually 7 different principles that make up the zero trust, and through the course of tonight, I'll go through it. But in essence, when I look at organizations, and when I'm consulting and when I'm having conversations, zero trust, many organizations are at various different stages of zero trust. And well, zero trust, first of all, is not a product, right? It's an approach. And what I can tell you is that those organizations that may not have actually even adopted a zero trust approach, as long as their security posture is mature, their cybersecurity capability is mature, and they're doing all those right things around, principle of least privileges, segmentation, those things, they're already on that way. So that, in a nutshell, Phil, is what zero trust is.
Okay, great. Joe, over to you. What's your perspective?
So I think of it, like and hey everyone, and it's a nice evening in Sydney, nice and wet and cold. I don't know where everyone else is in the world, but hope everyone's safe as well. So to me, I think of zero trust, I always use the analogy of an airport. So you have the trust, you've been given the trust by being granted a passport. So you buy your ticket, you get a ticket, you go to the first window to check in your bags. That's one gate you have to pass. So you give your ID, you give your passport to prove who you are. You think that's all good? Then you go to the next gate, the security gate, to get into the terminal. So you got to go through give your bags, again, present your passport, your boarding pass. So that's the next gate. When you're in the lounge, it's all good. You're in the terminal, you can go to shops, you can do whatever you want. But then when you get to the gate to board, you got to present your passport again and your boarding pass. Get you through again. And even when you're going on a plane, you got to show your boarding pass to get, not only to show you to your seat, but to verify that you actually have the pass to get on. So the concept of we're trusted, but we're always verifying. So we do need to have that trust, even though the name is zero trust. You still have to have a level of trust to get in, but we always need to verify you. And that's where things like multi-factor authentication will come in, and things like that. And that's vitally important when we, working from home and going to a hybrid workforce. So to me, that's how I explain it. I like to give human analogies to technical concepts, and raise a conversation, because it's not just people, it's devices, things, as well, and applications obviously too.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Ashwin. So getting now to the crux of things, I'll come back to you, Ashwin. Say, as a CISO, you want to embark on this zero trust journey. What are those, fundamental factors that you need to put in place to, lay strong foundations for this to thrive or to succeed?
So that's great. Okay. So I think first of all, it's important to understand, where you are today, what your current maturity level to zero trust is. Then you need to have a stake in the ground of where you want to go. Of course, you ruthlessly prioritize those controls that will give you the maximum amount of benefit for getting to that zero trust. Now, it's really important that that before you actually start on this journey, and this is a mistake I see so many organizations actually make, which is they try to implement security controls to implement zero trust. But before you do that, it's really important that you have organizational level security policies, right? That is actually endorsed by executives. So there's some sort of executive sponsorship. There needs to also be a clear understanding of what our organizations are expecting of our users. And it's got to be part of your onboarding process as well, so that people actually understand their responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. And one of the things that I want you to keep focus on is that you've got to keep your policies in layman's term, right? In very simple language, because this policy will be read and is meant to be understood and accepted by everybody in your organization. So don't make it too complex. And the idea is that you take these policies and then you apply to different business units. So for example, I think it's, there's no point really implementing zero trust if your finance team, for example, don't understand the risks, right? And that it's important that they understand it's not just about that cyber data, it's about any kind of sensitive information. For example, it's unacceptable for finance team, for example, to share sensitive financial information outside their team, right? So when they understand that, it's so much easier to now implement these types of controls and these types of mindsets. And the same thing applies for security teams, right? You want to make sure that the security teams understand what the corporate policies are, so that they can take those policies and then they can translate that into policies and standards and practices that can be then implemented into whatever security controls that you have. So think again of principle of least privilege, think of default deny, the need for multi-factor authentication, segmentation, microsegmentation, those sorts of approach.
Okay, Joe, your reflections, what would you prioritize to set the right foundation?
For me, yeah. So for me, and Ashwin touched on it briefly. It's user awareness. It's people awareness. So people are always the weakest link in security. It's either insider threat, malicious, or accidental. So it's giving people the awareness of what to do, what not to do, but not impacting their productivity and being another buzzword, frictionless to their workday, to what they do. So when we start introducing controls, we don't want to make people jump through 5 hoops to do their job that would normally take maybe 1, right? Because what will happen is you'll bring in shadow IT, which is, the term is, getting around process, basically, right? So, do I really need to log into these 3 things when I can just do it off the web because it's a web-based application? So why can't I just log in directly and do it? And I can just use my iPad instead of my work laptop, because my work laptop has too many things to get around and it takes too long and it's clunky and disconnects. And while my iPad, it's on the internet, it's on the wireless, or it's got 4G. And it works. So, but then that opens up the attack vector. So that's where we need to have those controls that most importantly protect the workload, the data, the people, but don't interfere with the person's day-to-day jobs, right? Don't interfere with the productivity of the company as well, because there's costs involved in a cyber attack, but there's also costs involved in working around security and causing a lot of operational expenses in that, and then obviously cleanup work and reputational damage.
Wow. Okay, that's brilliant. It sounds to me then that this concept is not as is not as bad as it sounds. I like that you're taking us back to the fundamentals of cybersecurity strategy and transformation, where everything starts with, with the end users and the culture and the, getting everyone on board the journey. I think that's very, very important. So say if, assuming you were going into an organization that has not considered zero trust before, of course they're doing something, but say assuming you were a new CISO or whatever, or a consultant, you're getting in, what are, say, maybe the 3 things that you would recommend that the priority? Cybersecurity is very broad, is expansive. We talk of different kinds of non-negotiable controls. But for you to get those early quick wins, build momentum, and get going, what are the building, the first key areas, practical initiatives that you can roll out?
So from my perspective, and this is really based on a lot of the learnings from Checkpoint's incident response team, right? Just as an FYI, we responded to over 3,500 calls for help globally last year, and we learned a thing or two. And one of the things that we learned is that a lot of organizations, as soon as they get breached, the very first thing that a threat actor does is goes for that Active Directory. And the reason they do that is because they really, really want to ingrain themselves inside your environment. So it's all about lateral movement, right? That's one of the first things that a threat actor will do. So it's imperative that you have controls and measures in place to prevent that lateral movement of threats. And this is where you need to use existing technology. Most organizations, all organizations will have next generation firewall security control. So the idea is to try and implement those segmentation. So you want to compartmentalize your network so that in the event there is a breach in one part of the network, well, you're containing that breach there, right? And that's going to give you at least a fighting chance to be able to defeat that attack. So what you want to do is leverage your existing security controls to segment your network, so compartmentalize your network, and then implement security controls that will look at the context of the flow of that traffic. So now start thinking about mapping the actual identity of a user to that traffic flow and seeing if that user should be allowed, and also implementing on top of that advanced control. So, that user might be allowed, but what if they're actually doing something malicious? So now you're doing deep packet inspection and things like that. So that would be my number one thing, right? Make sure you compartmentalize your network. The opposite of that is having a flat network, very bad. And if you're in the cloud, then and cloud breaches happen very regularly these days because it's just such an easy place to make a security, there's security oversight. So we see this day in and day out, right? So make sure, again, you segment your network, you micro segment your cloud environment. You've got to gain visibility into that area. When I talk about cloud segmentation, there's a really important concept here around hub and spoke model. So use those sorts of approach, those blueprints to implement principle of least privilege and segmentation. That's segmentation, micro segmentation, and the other one is of course around identity. You want to make sure you can identify those users, and again, it's not just about who the user is, but what device are they coming to? What's the context of that flow of that traffic? Are they coming from a trusted device, or are they coming from an untrusted device? And is that actually an anomaly because they always come through a trusted device? Why? And are they coming from a different region? I mean, we don't expect that particular user to be logging in from the US, that sort of stuff. So I think authentication, having that context of how the flow of traffic is happening, and segmentation, that'd be the 3 big ones for me.
Wow. Sure.
So for me, I'd be looking at so first I would get a state of play of the organization and get an asset inventory and have a look at the either the physical assets, the data assets, the soft and hard assets, right? I'd then probably see what the strategic direction of the organization is, what vertical they're in, and what we need to comply with to align with that, to get some quick wins there. And finally, well, I mean, to 3A would be, look at in-flight projects and see how, if there's any quick wins of top priority projects that we can look at and obviously optimize in terms of security. But primarily, the most important thing is, like I touched on first when my first response, we need to get the people on board. We need to get the culture right. And if that's making it fun, gamifying some phishing attacks and giving prizes away and just getting marketing involved in the organization or anyone like that, just to make it more fun, get everyone involved, so security isn't seen as the no team, right? Mate with all the stakeholders in the applications teams who, applications make businesses money, right? So talk to them, go to them, make sure they're on board. Obviously cloud, like Ashwin touched on that, we need to make sure there's controls in the cloud because we can't rely just on the cloud provider to do the security for us. We still have ownership there. So we need to ensure that that's known as well to the organization, to the correct teams, and just, work with everyone internally, and then, build relationships with the key vendors that they talk to.
Wow, excellent insights, gentlemen. I'm absorbing a lot of really great practical insights into how you build this. Coming back then, we in cybersecurity, we've been talking about skills shortage for quite some time, and I'm keen to understand your views here. What does this, concept of zero trust? What's the impact on an organization's, internal capabilities? The entire challenge, a lot of cybersecurity teams are stretched. There's a lot of reports there that people are, they're bent out and they don't last in their roles. And a lot of the, practical elements that you are suggesting in terms of network segmentation, redefining your authentication, and just building a broader culture requires resources. What is the best way forward for organizations that have always been struggling to attract, skilled cybersecurity talent? How do they adapt to this new challenge of zero trust and pressing regulatory requirements?
So Phil, you're right. There is a skill shortage, a big skill shortage. The challenge, again, when I speak to customers, one of the biggest challenge is, especially in the SOC team, is finding the right level of skill set for SOC teams. The problem that most SOC managers will tell you is that, well, we know that the number of attacks are increasing right now. For example, here at Checkpoint, we can see worldwide, our own customer base, we're seeing about 120 million attacks a day, right? So and that number is increasing, and every organization, the numbers are increasing. It is, what it is, I suppose. We're seeing 93% rise in ransomware, for example, just in this year. Since the beginning of this year, ransomware attack has, according to our telemetry data, so that's increasing. The workload is increasing. We know that SOC teams are getting burned out, right? 3 out of 4 SOC engineers actually are complaining about burnout. This is based on a Polymer Institute's report. And so we know there are those challenges. And another challenge when I speak to customers is that a lot of these security guys have a lot of tribal knowledge. This is stuff that's here in their head. When they move, they take all that IP away. And if you hire somebody new, it will take them 2-3 years to actually understand the culture of their organization. It'll take them a long time to skill up in those technologies. And the other challenge, of course, is we're throwing point products at this. So that's making things more complex as well. Especially when I see all of these point products and they generate logs that actually speak different language and they actually contradict each other sometimes, right? So this is all adding to this chaos. So how do you tackle this? In my mind, the only way to tackle this is to actually leverage one of the key recommendations, by the way, of Zero Trust, which is automation and orchestration. That is one of the fundamental requirements if you want to implement Zero Trust. So automation is the key, right? You want to be able to, of course, prevent as many of the attacks and the threats, but where you can't, you want to be able to automate that response. So You cannot take a human-centric approach anymore. You've got to automate that. That's number one. The other thing I would say is also automate the security operation tasks, those mundane stuff that the SOC team do, automate those things and have technology help you triage threats, right? So that, because we're humans and we tend to work in a sequential order, but that won't cut it when it comes to cybersecurity. So you need to be able to triage stuff so that your teams are working on the threats that will hurt you the most. And there are tools available for that sort of stuff now. And you can use APIs and stuff like that to basically check different threat intelligence to do the triaging. So to wrap up that answer, I will say, invest your time and understand how SOAR platforms, or security orchestration and automation and response, right? Those incident response automation tools, how that will help you. That's the key in my mind.
Wow. Sure.
Yeah, and I think before going into that, I think you need to assess the risk appetite of the organization and work to that, because too many controls and over security can bring in obviously shadow IT, but can also cause the burnout, because then you'll log in too many things, you log in unnecessary things, you've got too many controls. So you're slowing down productivity, you're slowing down network performance, and you're causing issues with even the help desk, because apps are slowing down, everything's slowing down. So you need to work to the organization's risk appetite, to their regulatory compliance, whatever's needed in their vertical, in their industry, and work around that, and then build tools around that, and have training and awareness for not only the security team, but everyone involved, including staff. Again, back to the security awareness. If everyone's doing the right thing, which not all the time happens, and that's for accidental or maliciously, unfortunately, then things can go smoothly. And then when we do have technical difficulties, where there's external attacks or technical issues with products and solutions, then it still makes everyone's life easier, right? As long as we're building controls and the zero trust around the requirements and the risk appetite of that organization. So if they only need 3 gates to get through for zero trust, then 3 gates it is, right? There's no point putting 7 gates if it only needs 3 gates, right? That's just too much.
Wow. Excellent responses again. And just to recap what you said, Ashwin, obviously to leverage technology to minimize the impact on security teams and take away the mundane tasks so people can focus on more strategic areas. And I like how Joe always brings the business side of things, understanding the corporate risk appetite, because there's no one size fits all, and developing controls that are in line with the level of risk. So I think that brings me to maybe my last question before I open this up. And again, I'm bringing my cybersecurity strategy hat. I'm always keen to know what could go wrong, and so I'll ask each of you, what do you think are the top 2 risks or 2 obstacles CISOs or cyber leaders will run into in trying to drive the zero trust strategy, and what are your recommendations to circumvent those challenges?
So, okay, top 2 risks. I think the first risk is probably throwing too many point products at this, right? My recommendation is you've got to leverage your existing cybersecurity investment, and it is possible to do that to try and level up your maturity with zero trust. So stop throwing point products to all of this stuff. Look at what your existing investment is and try to leverage that to implement a zero trust architecture. And the added benefit of this, by the way, is that we know for a fact, because Ponemon Institute tells us that those organizations that actually make their security more complex, meaning they're throwing point products, right? Actually, they end up paying more as the cost of a breach. So they end up losing out a lot more money because the environment is so much more complex. So that would be my first tip, that make sure you don't throw point products, look for existing investment. And the second thing is you've got to look at all areas of your of zero trust. Now, also please keep in mind that zero trust is is one part of a much larger puzzle. Just because you're aligned to zero trust does not mean that your maturity level, or doesn't mean that you're safe, right? There are so many other things that you could still be doing. So be mindful of that and understand that if you are going to go down the zero trust path, there are 7 different elements to it. So don't just focus on 1 or 2. Yeah, of course you want to prioritize, but make sure if you're going to cloud, for example, you've got to make sure that your workloads are safe and secure. Make sure you're looking after addressing, have a strategy for your data, even in data at rest, data in motion, data in use. Make sure you have strategies around authenticating people, so single sign-ons, the multi-factor, and all of that kind of stuff. So those are the 2 things I would say, right? Number 1 is don't make it complex by throwing point products, and number 2, make sure you assess your risk against all of those 7 factors that zero trust recommends.
Excellent.
Sure, I agree with that. My 2 would be, again, back to shadow IT, and not just individual, that could be team-based. So an application team will have a deadline to roll something out, and they don't want to go through the process of getting security to verify, the security team to verify, CISO to verify. They've got their budget, they've got a deadline, it needs to be done in 2 weeks. They've got the cloud, they can do it. So it's that. So making it appear to be too complex internally and too difficult to get their job done, and that in turn will slow down the business. So that's 1. And 2 would be with everyone working from home, with a hybrid workforce, just having probably too much trust as well. So that not evaluating. So security is a cycle, right? So it's an always evolving cycle. So just because you've patched everything and you think you've got all your controls, you don't just leave it and go, okay, that's done, that's sorted. Or the corporate laptops are patched, or they've all got their VPN solution, or whatever, right? It's always reassessing everything, because there's always new threats, there's always new regulatory compliance, there's always new threats, and new vulnerabilities coming out. And just because someone's working from home and they've got a secure laptop doesn't mean that the fridge that's also connected on the network that might have a vulnerability, or a TV might have a vulnerability, can get into your wireless network at home, jump through your kid's laptop, your kid's iPad, and onto your laptop, right? Because you're still on your home network, right? So it's always having that dropping the ball. So I've seen organizations drop the ball. They think they've done everything. They think I've sent my workloads are in the cloud. The cloud providers told us that they've got security controls and we paid extra for that. But yeah, they're not looking at their own backyard.
Excellent conversation. I wish I could continue this. But I really like the change of language, not only on this forum, but in the broader cybersecurity community, because the biggest challenge that we have faced, even up until now, a lot of business users perceive security as, we just hardwired to say no to things, and the term zero trust itself doesn't help.
Yeah.
Because users want they want to be trusted. So the terminology itself, I initially am warming up to this, but initially, again, zero trust, because traditionally we say, users can't be trusted, users, the weakest link. There's a lot of negative terminology, but I really like how you are shifting all this to say, let's do away with complexity. Let's make life easy for people. Let's not, keep burning cybersecurity budget by throwing in new technologies. Let's leverage what we have. So really quality conversation. I'll open up to the forum, and there's two questions that came via chat, and I think as time goes on, people will feel free to ask questions as well. But because there's only two questions, I won't be reading them out to you. I'll ask Raju, do you want to grab the mic and just ask your question?
Sure, thanks, Phil.
Yes.
Yes, so I mean, one of the tenets of, or one of the approaches to zero trust is about segmenting networks, and that should be something that every business should have built into the networks anyway. But we have lots of legacy flat networks, and trying to move from that environment to a segmented network can be very painful, expensive, because it can mean first of all, planning a new topology, readdressing everything, in some cases having to reinstall applications, in some cases you find applications have hard-coded IP addresses in the code or in configuration files. It can be just extremely painful, and then often there's no documentation, so you have to figure out what ports and protocols and things the application is actually using. All of that can be a tremendous amount of work and basically stop the whole project dead. Have anybody come across alternative approaches than actually rebuilding the whole network?
Yeah, I mean, I would talk about and suggest like a hybrid cloud environment there. And if there is a burn-in project application, it needs to be deployed, then the quickest, obviously, and the easiest way, and may not be cheapest way, to spin it up in the cloud, as long as you have your local controls in place, then that would be the easiest way. That way you don't have to worry about, changing too much what you have, your legacy, and build on top of that. So if it's either a hybrid cloud where you're using public cloud for that, or you're building some kind of overlay on top of what you have to work around that. But it's that way it's less disruptive to what's existing and to existing applications. And then as they mature, shift over to the new environment, whether it be a public cloud, another IaaS environment, private cloud colo, or something that's segregated, to bring that shift across. Because in the end, we do everything for the business, right? That we work for, that we're consulting to, that we're the staff or we're consulting to. It's about that, right? So we'll be less disruptive, but we want to give them guidance on having the correct security controls in place to make those decisions. So again, it depends on their risk appetite too. So public cloud isn't an answer. Then it could be a private cloud in a colo environment, or a new rack in a data center type thing.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Joe. I think going to the cloud would be quite a neat sort of a solution. But the important thing, of course, here is, and I see this in fact a lot, is organizations trying to leverage the cloud quite quickly, and especially with COVID-19, right? Like we've seen this digital transformation absolutely just skyrocket. Before you do move to the cloud, and before you do start to use these new infrastructure and architecture, especially around the serverless and the container stuff, make sure you understand the risks around that and you're prepared to deal with those risks. We see so many organizations that are moving to the cloud, but don't actually have an understanding of all the pitfalls that are there. So because they don't understand the pitfalls, they are actually exposing themselves. I'll give you one example, and we see this actually a lot. It is, almost every man and his dog is right now running cloud applications, right? And this is actually an area where we see CISOs really now losing control, because they're actually going up against DevOps guys. And Devops Mindset is a completely different mindset to your network security guys and your other application writers. So there's DevOps guys, they have a culture of why reinvent the wheel, right? If somebody's written a piece of code that I can leverage in my application, then I will do that. And if I've written a really nice piece of code, I'm going to share that with the rest of the world. And what we're seeing is that DevOps are using, I think at the moment it's about like 70 or 80% of the code is actually borrowed code for most applications. And those applications have a ton of vulnerabilities. It's actually something nation-state threat actors are also using, by the way, where they're embedding malicious code or tainting those container images. And so when your guys are downloading that and they're not actually validating that it is actually from a trusted source, it hasn't been tainted with, then they're introducing additional risks that you may never have thought about. So really important as you do that shift, that security is embedded in that process.
Excellent, excellent. Justice, you still there? You want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. My question was about supply chain attacks and how we can introduce the concept of zero trust in helping organizations and the global enterprise implement some level of security within the architecture, because we see this as a major challenge. Looking at the complexity of supply chain, how do we really implement zero trust within this?
Great question.
Yeah. Thank you.
So if I've heard you correctly there, Justice, you're asking about supply chain attacks and how do we deal with that, right? These third-party supply chains. Is that correct? That's what you want to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do we apply the concept of zero trust?
Okay. I'll share with you a really quick case study that we just worked recently. This was actually a call our incident response team received where a customer had just been duped. The CFO had been duped into making a large transfer. Now this sounded to us like a classic business email compromise, and we hear about this kind of stuff every day, right? So our investigation started off with the Office 365 in this case, because that was the email infrastructure. And we looked at all the settings and everything, and we typically can find something that, like the user that would have been compromised initially. But this was really interesting because we couldn't actually find any employee that had been compromised. In fact, this organization had done everything right. They had multi-factor authentication, they had log monitoring, everything. And we wanted to understand what had happened here. So we started digging deeper to try and identify the threat actor so we could fingerprint them. And so that way we could identify their tactics, techniques, and the procedure they used, right? And we couldn't understand, so we kept digging, and what we found was really, really interesting. In this case, it was actually a partner, a third party that was compromised. You see, Office 365 has a component where a third party can manage that environment for you. This is not an Office 365 thing, by the way. I'm not having a go at Microsoft. This is a software as a service methodology issue, right? WebEx has a component as well that does this. So what had happened is that a threat actor had actually fooled one of the security administrators in that partner to share their credentials. That's how the threat actor was able to get into this environment and then started to manipulate the mailboxes. We actually saw new mailboxes pop up while we were investigating. Someone was pretending to be someone they're not. We saw additional Azure infrastructure being stood up, probably for crypto mining or something like that. Now, the thing here is, okay, my approach would be this: two things. First, do you have in your contracts a right to audit? Right now, this doesn't mean that you're going to go and audit your third parties, but what you do is you want them to actually provide you with a report to say, yes, we've had an audit done and we are meeting these sort of security requirements, right? So you want to make sure that your partners are are exercising the same level of security as you or higher. That's the first thing that I would recommend. The second thing is you want to have a look at those contracts and really ask yourself, do you want those partners to be able to make infrastructure level changes in your Office 365? Do you want them to be able to spin up new mailboxes and make changes? And the thing is that if you do give them that permission, you're not really going to know who is doing what unless you're constantly monitoring that.
So for me, my two basics would be just look at the access policies and context. So implement straight away multi-factor authentication, right? Simple to get the, because if it could be an application accessing an application from a partner, not a user as such, right? So you want to have that layer of protection. And that along comes with the context of their access. So, you know, is it a user? Is it an application access in that? And yeah, contracts as well. Yep, that's obviously correct, because we need to make sure they do have the right access. But going back to the concept of least privilege. So yeah, we have a third party, these users should have access, but do other users in that third party need to have access as well? So it comes up, you know, around identity access management and having, you know, zero trust principles like multi-factor authentication in place to give that layer of protection.
Wow, great. And if I may just add a quick reflection, there is one of the key challenges that you face when you're dealing with these third parties is a lot of those contracts were entered at a time when cybersecurity was no big deal. So 3 years ago, not many people were thinking about security. So when you want
too much trust.
Yeah, too much trust, exactly. I think that's brilliant. There was too much trust. So when you go and audit those third parties, you know, there will be almost nothing in the contract. So that comes down to how well can you negotiate your position and persuade them to work around those constraints and implement some of those controls.
And continually auditing and checking that to make sure, like I said, it's a continuing cycle. It's, you know, NIST defined as a cycle as well. It's going back and rechecking, you know, if it's yearly, quarterly, half yearly, whatever's in the contract, whatever you set out.
Awesome. This is actually a topic worth another webinar because it's just so broad and complex and very important and topical. So we will organize something around supply chain. Just anyone else with a question, please flick them through the chat or just put your hand up. Maybe I'll pause briefly before I ask my next question, because I want, you know, it's better when there is a conversation from everyone.
I've got a question related to policy, actually.
Right.
So I was just going to ask, so have you seen a need for like sort of large scale updates to policies to accommodate the zero trust framework? And if so, have you seen any approaches taken to sort of develop and adopt and roll them out?
I think, personally, I think the supply chain attacks which Microsoft had they hit with SolarWinds, I think that caused a lot of internal wake-up calls, which then caused these extra layers of policy and investigation and assessment to be done. So I know from my current role and previous roles, you know, that would cause that caused a lot of calls to the pre-sales teams and the SEs to, hey, can you help us with this? And the other big shakeup would be the pandemic. Obviously, working from home, everyone having to work from home overnight. It wasn't planned 2 weeks ahead. It was, you know, hey, from tomorrow, everyone's home. Use your laptops. If you don't have one, go buy one, and we'll sort it out with IT.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Work, you know, COVID-19, right? That has just significantly changed the way we operate, the way we do security now. At Checkpoint, we're quite lucky, obviously, because we are a cybersecurity company and we do make VPNs and remote access technology. So for us, it was a very easy change. In fact, within, I think, within 8 days, we had entire workforce, 5,500 people working remotely. And but we also helped so many organizations with that as well, right? So one of the things that we saw was organizations, many of them in the hundreds, that were hopelessly underprepared for remote working. So, you know, requests for licenses, those sorts of stuff absolutely went through the roof. And one of the things that caught a lot of people out was, a lot of organizations, was just that they hadn't actually sized, you know, their security infrastructure to allow for that kind of massive uplift in VPN and those perimeter security capabilities. So yeah.
Right. Okay, maybe I'll ask one last question. So a lot of people on this forum will be wondering, just like Natasha, where do I start? And, when we talk about ASD, top 8, CIS, top 20, NIST this, NIST that, there's always standards out there that you can, download and tailor to the needs of your organization. With Zero Trust, what's there? Are there any industry standards or frameworks, practical stuff that people can leverage?
Yeah, so I think from what I've seen, almost every security vendor has some sort of a best practice approach on how you can use their technology to implement components of Zero Trust. Right, so I think that would be actually a good place to start, have a conversation with your security vendors around this stuff. But in my mind, it starts actually with visibility. You've got to have visibility first and understand where the risks are, and then you prioritize that. So that's what I would recommend. At Checkpoint, we've got, we do security checks and things like that, which actually gives you some pretty decent visibility, just so that you can actually start having some evidence-based discussions around this.
Yeah, so I would look at, do an asset registry, understand your risk appetite, and then if you want an open standard, look at the NIST 827 framework. But then also, if you've got any regulatory compliance, like with APRA, if there's anything with APRA, if you're in finance, anything in healthcare, education, look to those bodies too. They'll have material online, and then obviously go to your vendor and work out a solution with them, or a partner as well, right? So the partners can also help you, because they can connect with different vendors and offer the best solution. But we want to make it simple, and we want to make it not as scary, like you said, Phil. We don't want to scare everyone. We're 0, 0, 0. It's more about making everyone comfortable, and that's where, again, it comes back to the culture and bringing awareness and having everyone involved, and knowing that it's not such a scary thing. That Zero Trust can mean just your phone popping up and you having to say, yes, that's me, and then you're online and you won't have to log in again that day, right? So it can be as simple as that, right?
Okay, and I suppose if I could add to that, it's actually quite an easy approach if you just take a phased approach to this, right? Yeah. Prioritize it, phase it, and adopt a methodology that will allow you to have those little quick wins over time, and you can demonstrate the benefits of Zero Trust.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ashwin. Thank you, Joe. So in maybe 1 minute each, what are your closing remarks? What would you like people to take away? If there's one thing you wanted people to take away?
From me, if there's not one thing. In fact, you've got to do a lot of things, and you've got to do them well. Yes, you've got to prioritize where your risks are, but there's not one single silver bullet here. So don't kid yourself and think that there is one. You've got to do a lot of good things around, and make sure you address all of those 7 key requirements, right? Around the automation piece, the visibility piece, and with visibility, make sure you've got threat intelligence on top of that, right? Visibility is useless if you don't know that something is malicious or not. So those would be my closing remark.
Mine would be understand what you have, who you have, and what you need to protect and what you want to protect, and drive the message in top down and bottom up. Have everyone involved, and make it as less stressful as possible to everyone that needs to come across those controls. But do it right, like Ashwin said. Make sure you do it right, and make sure you're compliant, but compliance doesn't mean security either. So, and it's always it's a revolving loop. It doesn't stop. You need to keep going around and rechecking what you've checked. So that would be my advice.
Okay. Great. I can't thank you enough, both of you. Really, really honored to have you share your lived experiences. I think that's what stood out for me. It's stuff that you have implemented in your client environments, things that you've seen, things, technologies that you have used yourself. But what I like most is, the emphasis around, cultural transformation and the human aspects of cybersecurity. And also, that zero trust doesn't necessarily mean you go back to the board and say, I want $15 million more. You can leverage what you have. A lot of technologies, it's the thinking, it's a mindset. So that's what I took away. So thank you everyone for coming. What I would recommend everyone is, obviously everyone who is on this call have downloaded our Cyber Leaders app. We will make a post tomorrow just summarizing some of the key lessons from here. Let's keep the conversation going. I see a lot of questions coming through the chat now. I think I got 6 or so questions and reflections. Let's post that on the chat so everyone can benefit. So thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate this. I personally enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot about zero trust.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much for
everyone.
sharing.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks everyone. Good night. Good day.
you.
Good night. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.